Welcome to Earth, a Love Story. I'm your host, Robin Lassiter. And welcome to this episode that I am getting out just before I go into a long retreat away from phones and computers and into a space of hopefully deep connection with myself and with my land. It's going to be an adventure. I really wanted to get this episode out, though, before I left. This time on the podcast, I talked to my friend and fellow experiencer, Michelle. Michelle shares her extraordinary experiences with beings she calls the surgeons, as well as her contact with the Diamond Jellyfish. It's as exciting as it sounds, truly. It's an amazing story. These diamond jellyfish that she encountered are entities beyond the structure of duality who showed her the geometries of creation. I always experience Michelle as holding a uniquely creative seat and perspective. She always reminds me to stay in the liminal and stay with the mystery. In this conversation, we talk about what happens after death, the new geometric grid that is available, and how it's being installed real time through conversations like these that are happening through positive anomalous culture, and much, much more. All of this reminded me of something that I often think about with the podcast, but I haven't overtly said here. And it's a strange thing to say. It's not to toot my own horn or blow smoke, but I am connected enough in the experiencer community that I could pretty easily get all of the quote unquote big names on the podcast. And I have had the pleasure of speaking with some prominent and great thinkers on this podcast, like Jeff Kripal, Kelly Chase, and many others. And I have to say, there is something that's really special to me about the community of experiencers itself. The unknown, ordinary, everyday people who have extraordinary experiences and extraordinary minds. When my rebellious teenage self arises, and no shade to her, we love her, it's a very fuck the system, fuck the man, punk rock, fuck the empire, long live the Rebel Alliance kind of vibe here on Earth, a Love Story. I have a total bias and soft spot for the weird kids on the playground who turned out to be the weird, cool, awesome grown-ups holding down the weird, cool, awesome corner of reality that I want to hang out in. And those are the voices that I really love sharing with you guys. It feels really special. It feels really important, and it feels very alive, and I enjoy it very much. And I've also been thinking a lot lately about the Bridge Collective and what it means, what we're doing there. You might not have heard me talk about the Bridge Collective in a while. It's a closed group at this point where we study and explore lots of different things. One of them being how we both bridge and create the next iteration of what's coming on the planet as the great change of systems and institutions continues, the great crumbling, the great unveiling, the great revealing, the apocalypse. As that all is underway, we are looking at what comes next and figuring out how to both create it and hold that vision while many things fall apart around us. And by the way, the only way to get into the Bridge Collective is to work with me one-on-one or go through one of my group courses. You're welcome to reach out to me about joining the Bridge Collective, and we can certainly have a conversation about that after I get back from retreat, which will be sometime in June. Anyway, it's become very clear to me that there is a great need at this time for imagination. Not as in daydreaming, fluttery, floaty, unreal, imaginary things, which that's great, that has its place, but as in imagination as an organ of perception and creation, as in imagining our best possible personal and collective futures, and then holding that vision, living that vision through the crumbling. Those of us who have gone through the underworld, through the alchemy of grief, through Inanna's descent and return, know that down there in the dark is where everything that no longer serves is stripped away. And we emerge tempered like steel, strong, flexible, powerful, clear-eyed. But at the bottom of the descent, it's messy, scary, chaotic. We necessarily have to lose the path to find the path. And I believe that the collective is now in the underworld descent. And like Anon is waiting woman Nin Shabar. We can hold the knowing for the collective that it's possible to get to the other side, and we can send spiritual power and help when needed. I'm very clear on the reality that we will need our spiritual power moving forward. We will need the deities. We will need the dead. We will need our helpers and guides to get through what's coming. This is an all hands on deck situation, and I don't say that to instill any kind of fear, because I am very, very hopeful about humanity and our future. And there will be people who are afraid, and there will be moments that fear is the appropriate response. And we're going to need each other, and we're going to need the other worlds. I really, truly believe that. And the power that we're going to need is just love. Spoiler. That's all that it is. It's a love that's big enough for all of this. Even the seemingly incomprehensibly, terrifyingly other things and people, we're going to need a love big enough for them as well. And that takes a lot. It takes a lot of courage, takes a lot of strength, takes a lot of understanding that we don't die. Like real realization that death is not the end, and that we do go on beyond this lifetime, and that if we don't need to fear death, then we really don't need to fear life and being alive. And it's a really profound journey that I have had the pleasure and the grace to be taken on by my teachers and guides and helpers and mentors. And I'm really excited about my work and my offerings, because that's what's arriving. There's this new Apocalyptic Mother course. Many of you have already signed up for it. And it's about all of this. Becoming Apocalyptic Mother is a space for women to move through the underworld, to claim and strengthen their spiritual power, to meet the great round, the uncried cry. To truly live, we must die before we die. To meet the parts of ourselves that we've pushed away, to draw them close, to integrate them, to bring them back in, to give them love, and notice what happens when we apply unconditional love to the parts of ourselves that we think are perhaps inherently unlovable. And when we get really, really good at that, we start to be able to do that for the whole world. And it is, in my humble opinion, my bias, that this is the kind of love that the world needs and that we're all going to need. The goddess has 1,000 faces, and the Apocalyptic Mother is the goddess for our times. She burns away anything that serves oppression, injustice, concretized, brittle death. She's the life bringer. She is the one who holds the vision for the new world, and in this cohort, we invite her in and we become her. She is fire and cool water and the imaginal realm of air and the steady, grounded earth herself. And she is the maiden and the mother and the crone integrated into a powerful woman who shines as her most authentic self. We are journeying together for 9 months in this upcoming cohort, starting on June 22nd. And there is also an optional in-person retreat at the end, which, fingers crossed, will be at Ghost Ranch in New Mexico, Georgia O'Keeffe's Ghost Ranch in New Mexico in March of next year. I'm really excited about it. The power that's building around it is incredible. I will be holding a Q&A session for this cohort sometime in early June. Okay, my friends, that was all the things. There's so many things to say right now, to be honest. I have so much bubbling up inside me. There's so many truths that feel like they want to be spoken, and at some point I just have to get out what wants to come out in this moment and trust that there will be time and space for the rest to emerge and arise. And right now, what I'm very excited to give to you, to gift to you before I slip away into the other worlds, is this conversation with the wonderful Michelle.
Just in thinking about doing the podcast, I've just been thinking about my story. I've never really held this exactly like a story. You know, they're just things that happen. I've never really known what to do with them or where to put them. So, Yeah, I was thinking about it like through, like what's my experience or story? In a lot of ways, it's interesting I feel like more people are talking about these experiences, and there's like a new kind of space for them that makes it easier. So, there's a lot of patterns, right? It's like once you start hearing all these stories, you're just like, oh, yeah, I had that one. I had that one. Like a lot of people, looking back, I probably, this has been happening my whole life, but I didn't know it. It was always just sort of contained, and I was creative, I was imaginative, and they never felt scary or strange to me. And it really wasn't until my 20s where I had, again, it just feels like a really common experience where you just sort of have that blasted open experience where things just feel very connected and all is one. And that was probably the moment where I would say I really felt like I knew I was different. I knew something different was happening. And then, sort of started the kind of spiritual journey. and again, it was like, the experience in my 20s was sort of like early mid 90s. It was sort of a thing, right? People were doing that. But the truth is, like, it just never quite clicked. It never, I don't know, just things fell off for me. It just, something really just wasn't there. And it was really disruptive. The experience, like everything was disruptive. I never found a place, like a process for how to ground it. And I feel like a lot of the approach to experiences in the sort of 90s and 2000s was like, yeah, lots of people have them, but we don't talk about them, right? It's almost like there was something like egoic to talk about them. So I just never processed it. And then I was just sort of done. And I remember like the moment of just being done, of like just knowing I was going to have to get like small into my body again to just sort of just live my life in the world and doing the things I knew were expected of me. But it was like, it was so much better than living in the chaos all the time of what the experiences were. So I sort of just did that, and it was just good. I really was just happier to just like let it all go. And then in 2012, my husband died unexpectedly. And that just like blasted the door off, never to be put back on. So yeah. And then the experience that I had recently, it just sort of all connects. It just sort of feels like almost from that point on, it's just been, part of what was different is like before, the experience I had was like very abstract. It's like I felt like I was in space, and there was something just very is beautiful. But after my husband died, it was like there were very specific entities, and I was going to very specific places, and there was like a process that I was going through, and I felt like it was a communication. Like I had choice in it. I was being talked to. So yeah, everything just seemed really different after my husband died. And kind of ironically, where I say, like, I feel like I had choice, but I also feel like I didn't, in that it was just like, I couldn't make myself small again the way I did the first time. Like that was just not something I could have like psychologically handled. It's been a journey over the last decade of, just exploring it. But I think recently really getting to the space of like, this is real. Like, I feel like I always explored it where it was like I knew it was happening, and I never questioned if I was crazy or anything like that. It was just like, dreams are real too, right? So it's just like, is this real like a dream, or is this real like my waking life? Like that, I never I could never wrap my head around that differentiation, where now I'm like, yeah, no, this is real.
Yeah, thank you. I lately have been noticing that there are some people who want to go into the experience itself, and then also completely fine to hold sacred experiences that you've had. So I like my exploration right now is how much to share of the actual experience and how much to keep for myself, because I shared so much through my book and so much through the podcast. And all of this is a setup with lots of like consent to ask if you want to share any of the experiences that happened around your husband's death, around the contact with these entities, what that was like, the information that you were given, the sort of being talked to. Was it like a teaching? What were you told? How do you feel about going into all of that?
Yeah, no, I'm good. I think a lot of times I'm so hesitant to give details because I think the first part of my, just experience of trying to find community it was so like taboo to give details, so it's almost like I feel like I have to have consent the other way. I'm like, do you want to hear this?
I want to hear it. Everybody's leaning in. Yes.
So yeah, after Mark died, there was about a 6-week period where I would describe it as I just felt like taken all the time. I've had conversations with them about it. They think that's funny. They were just like, no, you were just sort of showing up. But, whatever that is. And it would just be random, like in terms of, like, I can never tell when they're coming on. They happen at any point in time. I could be at a dinner party. I could be, like, it's just, they just happen. So yeah, it's like the 6 weeks after he died, it's just, everything is so weird. You're in an altered state constantly. And everybody around you is very, like, supportive of that, so it's probably the only time in my life where I've never felt the need to try to hide or control like the altered states. It was just like, okay, you get to just be out of it, for a while. And there was all kinds of different experiences, but the ones with the groups that I came to call the surgeons, it was like the first one, again, I just felt like I was just like suddenly there. And it was like this white room. It felt very 1970s sci-fi, it was just like very, very white, with like a bench just in this white room, And there was a woman in there, and she told me she was very happy I was there, that they wished more people would come when people they loved died. So I went and I like sat on the bench, and like I asked her what was going on with Mark, and she, told me she couldn't tell me any of the details of his process. Like that was very just private to him, but she could answer anything generally, So I'm like, okay, what happens when you die, So what she described was that when you die, you have to, like figure out how to like integrate your experiences of life into the consciousness you are. And for most people, this is a process. And for some people, it can be really difficult. And if it becomes too difficult, they might have to surgically remove like some of the experiences. That's how I came to call them the surgeons. And that this was not ideal. They really wanted people to be able to integrate their experiences. And that was a part of why they were happy I was there. They're like, the more, love, forgiveness, support they can feel, it just makes it makes it easier for them to integrate the experiences. So that was sort of like day one, was just sort of like, okay. And then I just sort of kept going up there. And a lot of it really was just like being there, It's not like we were really doing a lot. just almost like talking about like the nature of life and consciousness and just what the process was. And like at one point, it's one of those like, be careful what you ask for in altered states of consciousness. Because I was sort of like, yeah, this seems like such a waste. You have to do all of this once you die. I'm like, can I start my process now? And they were like, sure. So I have no idea what I set in motion that day, but my guess is it was something. So yeah, I mean, again, that was just sort of that 6-week period. There were other experiences I had during that 6-week period. Again, I've talked with you about it. I feel like these experiences are what I call like an underworld, but they're not like the dark trauma, pain underworld. It's just like there's something about another space I would go to. And this space, I feel like I've had memories since childhood from, where there's just no external light source. You know, this is why I think of it as underground. It's like light emanates from objects. It's almost like whatever the consciousness of the object is, it produces a light. So my experiences have been positive, but I definitely, when I'm in those spaces, you know there are not positive spaces too. So I definitely had experiences there where we were like preparing for his death in those spaces. And then after he died, you know, and after that 6-week period, once I got a little more grounded, I sort of was like, all like, I'm like, I want to go travel with you. This horrible thing happened. We can have some fun too. So I went through about a 1.5-year process where, because he did not think it was a good idea. And I really thought it was a good idea. So we went through about a 1.5-year process, and there was another entity there too who was helping us prepare to actually go travel somewhere together. And so yeah, we kept meeting up at like train stations, and he would just be like, I don't think this will be good for you. And I'm like, come on, let's do it. So we did end up going on a trip. And again, it's all like, I've been thinking a lot just about, you know, people talk about, you know, is there life after death? And it's almost like I feel like we have to get like more detailed in how we talk about these things, and what are the relationships between consciousness and our biological life as a form, and what are other forms. Because like in the trip we took, we ate, you know, and he was sort of depressed a little because he said food didn't taste as good to him now, you know. So just like a little detail. And of course I'm in the experience and so excited to be there. I'm just like, you know, but I think about that detail of, you know, like I'm very comfortable with the idea that consciousness continues on after death. But what is the form, and what is the relationship then of form to this particular biological incarnation? And I don't know those answers, but it's almost like I'm excited about the moment where we can really get past the materialistic worldview that it's just, you know, consciousness is just in our brains and we're here. Then, you know, it's just like, there's clearly so much more going on, but I don't feel like I get the answers I want from religion or things like that yet either. So yeah, and then the surgeons continued to work with me again, just through lots of different, just like adjustments, you know. I mean, I had a lot of fear. I had let go of his life insurance policy a month to the day before he died. So I had a lot of financial fears. I don't know. It's just like there was always this like kind of constant process of just slowly working with me. I don't always even know what or why, as much as they were just like always there and always present.
One of the things that came through as you were talking, I know you in the space of exploring that space that you're describing, a multidimensional aspect of us, right, that can go to these places, or it's already here.
Yeah.
And it's happening in so many different levels, and how that relates to the human physical form and what to do about it. How to be a human on the planet while also having connection to these other worlds and the interface of that, and just the richness of that experience. And I use richness often instead of challenge, because it's hard. It's a hard confluence to live in, is this space between incarnated human and this other world.
Yeah, it is. Like lately, I've been thinking a lot about, like, we talk a lot about like ontological shock, and that's definitely a part of it. But there's also like an ontological awe, right? I've just felt this whiplash between like the shock and the awe of it. And just recently, I'm just sort of like, I'm so over it. How do we be in our, normal bodies, living in the shock and awe of all these experiences? And it's just like, that's just like in my head. What if it's all just the same thing? Again, I think it's finally just stepping into, this is just real. It's only this like short little period of time, in human history that we've decided this isn't real. How useful it is, I don't know. It's like, is the materialistic worldview more useful? It may be, I don't know. That can be a conversation. Does this stuff really serve to better our lives? But yeah, getting over it, it's really very recent that I feel like I'm just really over it. So yeah, it's gotten easier. It's been very hard. That's been like the biggest struggle for me, is how to be just a normal person in life, living inside of these experiences. Maybe just the materialistic worldview is just crumbling so quickly that makes it feel easier too.
Yeah. As you're talking, the word that keeps coming up is integration. It's this unfolding integration. I'm able to hold more and more without thinking about it as much, or without needing to do a mental process around what's quote unquote real and what's not real, what's in the world, what is of my physical body versus these other aspects of myself. It feels like there's a move towards an integration of all these layers of the multidimensional self, which feels timely, right? And the material, like my view of materialism, and I think that this ties in a little bit to the experience that you've recently had, is that it functioned and continues to function in many ways, but it functioned really well for a long time to get us to a place of modernity. And you and I share the idea that as much as I long for the things that we've lost in modernity, I don't want to go back to a time where there wasn't access to medicine, where there wasn't access to the technology that we have. I don't think that this was a mistake necessarily. I think it's a very short blip that took us a really long way. And now we have an opportunity to integrate the things from the past that we've lost, and that maybe there can be a fusion into a new kind of future, not a like hard reset where we're all, living in caves with fire and talking about the days of technology and longing to recreate that, because I'm sure that's what we would do,
Yeah.
but that something else, we may have the opportunity for something else to happen. So I wonder what you think about that.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think it's like integration has always been this like hard word for me, because it's just, I've never understood like what does it really mean to integrate? It's like I can change, my worldview a little. I can accept things I didn't, like there's almost like small I integration, and then there's like big I integration. And lately I've been feeling with integration, it's like before it was like I was always trying to figure out the experiences over here and how do I pull it into me, where now it's just like there's this entire reality, and I'm relating to it now. It's less that I'm trying to integrate the experience into myself as I'm trying to integrate myself into the cosmos. Ever since Mark died, the energy in my body was off. Just felt like I had too much energy. The more I just let myself relate to the cosmos, it's like that energy that was like revved up in my body is just the energy needed for that communication. And I was always having to try to slow everything down to relate to my modern world. And yeah, it's a different, frequency, it's a word people use a lot. I don't know if it's actually a frequency, but it's just, there's something different in terms of how do you just relate to your world. And like part of it is like the modern world believes it can have answers for everything. It believes you can just like understand everything. And I just have accepted, like I don't understand my experiences. I don't know what they mean. I don't know that understanding is like the height of processing or mastery on something, So I think it is just sort of letting all those modern ideas that were something separate in a body, and we've really got our shit together once we really understand what's going on. This is something else entirely.
Well, I want to bring in what's arising. You and I also both have conversations about the feminine and about the goddess. And when I say the goddess, I mean life herself, all form, the spark of life, everything that's moving through, everything that's around us, everything that's arising in our own bodies and experience, that it's this field moving through us. And then there are all these iterations of that, one of them being, I believe, like the consciousness of our planet, and others being, particular deities and things like that. But really the foundation for me is this sensation, like the feeling body sensation of life moving through us. And I know that you and I both had experiences with that and explorations of that. So do you want to speak on her?
Yeah, well, it's like, again, I think, when we look at consciousness, life, and form as these possible three pieces of all of this, what does it mean to just be alive? I don't. There's a TV show, Yellow Jackets. I don't know if you've seen it. It's a story where this group of high school girls end up in a plane crash and get stranded in the wilderness for like 19 months. And they basically form nature religions and almost like covens. And I mean, it's sort of a dark comedy. It's not like a serious exploration on this, but there's something as I was just watching it. It's so beautiful what happens once you're really just interacting with the life force. Because part of it, it's brutal, right? It's terrifying. Like life is not loving or gentle. And I think there's something really extraordinary about that interplay of what happens when, we'll just say, possibly spiritual consciousness enters this pure life force of this planet. And I think that interaction is, I feel it might be special, I feel it might be possibly unique. I feel like the magnitude of life force on this planet is very possibly unique. And I think the more we can really understand what is life and what is consciousness, I don't know, I feel like we can interact with her better. Because I sort of feel like she doesn't really care if we're here. I don't really feel like, even when I would have the experiences with the underworld they always felt earthier too. There was an entity there. I always feel like he was a little more insectoid. It's another part of the reason I always think of it as underground. And there was never anything scary or cruel, but he definitely didn't care about me. I was definitely not the point or the focus, where when I have other experiences, things I feel like a little more angelic, like I feel loved. I feel like I am the focus. Yeah, I just think the more that we understand, I think, the earth and the goddess and these forces in their own space. Because I think a lot of times in cultural conversations, it's almost as if there's like a divide or a battle between sky gods and like Christianity and then like earth goddess things. And it's like they definitely are, my experience, are very separate. They're very different things. But we are here for those two things to interact. Mm. I mean, I believe that deeply. Like, just like this morning, I was just like sitting outside and it was early, it was still dark out. And this white light, I mean, at first I thought it was like a helicopter or something. It was just like this strobe light just like passed straight through my yard. And then suddenly there was like this blip and flash in the sky. And again, I have no idea, but it just felt like, I don't know, it was magical, right? These interplays between this life force and whatever consciousness is. I don't know if there's a consciousness guiding it or if we are the consciousness and we're just interacting with it. But yeah, it's special and we should have more fun with it.
Well, I would love to hear about your recent experience, which is, when I heard that experience from you and there were so many other things that were resonant with your recent experience that's when I invited you on the podcast. I remember the experience of hearing about what happened. And I remember feeling like it felt very timely for where we are on the planet right now with what's happening in, what I call the apocalypse, meaning the unveiling or the revealing. It's not an ending, it's a doorway, but there's a lot of change, a lot of crumbling, a lot of things happening right now. And your experience seemed to speak directly to that from the perspective of this, it's so hard to use words in this space, but a different dimension than physical bodies in our waking life. I'm trying to get away from words like higher space, to try to get rid of any hierarchy, but it often does. I know it often does feel like sort of a higher space. But yeah, I would love to, in as much detail as you would like, really hear about that experience.
Yeah, again, I was just like sitting on the couch one morning and all of a sudden I was with the entity I was calling the surgeon. And she was just like, I know you call me the surgeon, but I'm not really the surgeon, which I did understand. I thought of her as more of like a liaison, but she was like, do you want to meet the surgeons? So I was like, sure. And yeah, it's like I was just suddenly it's hard to even put words to them. I've been calling them the Diamond Jellyfish. They were like nothing I've ever experienced, like nothing that is anything here. The entity I was with before, she's since told me her name's Cassandra. She felt very like angelic, kind of looked like a human, sort of felt like just what you imagine. These beings were just like so sacred. And to even call them non-dual, it's almost like they were just beyond duality. Nothing that we experience that, seems to like fit. And then when I came back, Sandra was suddenly really different. She was always, I could see her. Usually was sort of like really glowy, like just felt like white. So I could see her. And she just had like personality. She was just sort of like, those things are crazy, right? I was just like, yeah. And then she was like, we don't really understand them either, but we know how to work with them. And then she told me, I had to look it up after the experience because I didn't exactly understand it, but she was like, what's the word now? I'm forgetting it. It's like a science, like I only knew it as the science fiction term where like robots or AI take over. It's singularity. She's like, they're very close to the singularity, which again, in the experience, I only knew the sci-fi kind of meaning. It was just sort of confusing, but I knew that's not really what she meant. And then she sort of took me on this tour through their dimension and then through sort of the history of the planet, which was bigger and longer than I feel like we understand. And through their dimensions, the like geometries they were showing me were very complex. Even calling them 3-dimensional feels weird, like almost like 4-dimensional, like you could go inside of them. But then as she was showing me like the history of the planet, it was very basic. I feel like it was very like preschool version of these geometries. And it's been really a bit for me to process. I feel like I'm finally more grounded in it. But it's sort of like the point of this planet isn't really peace. It's creativity. And creativity requires tension. So a lot of the triangles she was showing me, she was just like, the triangle is the strongest geometry of tension. And she was just sort of showing me how like some civilizations have tried to get rid of all the creative tension, and there can be ascension in that space or just collapse, but they can't sustain here, because the point of this is creativity. And then she was just showing me how kind of what I feel like our world in many ways has been like trying to do, which is like get rid of everything that you think is bad and just make everything good, 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 good. And she's like, that eventually just leads to kind of materialism and like a consumerism. So she's like, there really is something important about this triangle, of just like, how do you hold tensions, hold oppositions, because again, they can rip each other apart too, right? Like there's all sorts of ways this creativity can destroy itself. And again, we have choice. They're not going to tell us how to do it. The experience was so real. And I think really coming to terms, because I'm definitely much more of a love and light, and I want peace, and even the sort of like goddess stuff, because there is a kind of brutality to that, can make me uncomfortable, so really like grounding in that this space, this planet, we are here to create. I just think that is really what this is about. The experiences, I always feel like there's the experience, there's the processing of the experience, and then there's like meaning making in the experience. And the processing, I always feel is like a dialogue. It's like an ongoing conversation. And meaning making, I feel like, is always like an art form, right? It's just art. It's never truth, So if I were just to kind of say the like meaning making of the experience I had of the singularity, what I had to Google it after the experience, but what it means is it's the point where the mathematical model breaks down. So I feel like when she told me they were very close to the singularity, I kind of see that as like there's like this like line. Above the line, I think, is just like pure light. And then there's the beginning of creation. And I feel like the diamond jellies, they just feel like space and time, and that there's something very prismatic. And then as the light passes through that creation, like my first experience, was an experience of what I call cosmic color. I was just in space, and it felt like a lot like the images you see from Hubble, only it was alive. And it told me like everything was love. And it's like almost like that's the first creation, right? Is love. But after that, I just feel like it gets wild, right? And what's good and what's bad is not necessarily the point. Like that, after my first experience when I was in my 20s with the cosmic color, like when I landed, they gave me a riddle, which was all morality is human fiction. And it blew my head apart. I was very, I still get very worked up around like social justice issues and things like that. But I just sort of feel like it's it's fiction like art, and that once we're here, we can create whatever we want. Like the diamond jellies being basically the guardians of the life review made like total sense to me, because like there was nothing dualistic. It was nothing moral. It really felt more like you were entering this like holographic space where you really just had to reflect on your own conscious processing of it. Like they weren't passing judgment on you. I had another experience recently, a few weeks ago with them. And I had a friend who had a parent who was becoming really ill, and they believed she was dying. So the friend contacted me. I was just like in and out, and I was with like these beings they were like made of the same material as the diamond jellies, only they were humanoid and so joyous, where the diamond jellies really just felt beyond emotion, whatever these little hybrid creatures were. So joyous. And again, could have no idea what the interaction between them was. It's just like something very sacred was happening, I think, as this person was deciding if she was going to stay or go. Some pretty miraculous things ended up happening, for this family over the next few days. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know that I really have conclusions other than I don't know, like how to just like witness the mystery more, stop trying to control it so much, because I don't know that we can control it. But I just find that the more we can just like be with it and interact with it and almost allow it to work, whether our minds are perceiving or understanding anything.
Thank you for sharing. When I first heard you tell this story, I had an experience of kind of going into an altered state as I heard about the diamond jellyfish. I have an experience of being around craft that felt very much like jellyfish and very organic and alive and sort of translucent and blue and like definitely like entities. This doesn't feel the same, but that's my point of reference. But as I listen to you talk about this space, very close to the singularity, so non-dual, it's beyond non-dual, because it's not even can't be a concept of non-duality,
yeah.
right? I felt myself going into an altered state, and this time as well. And it's something that has been coming through quite a bit lately in different people on the podcast, actually sharing their experience of sort of how source becomes form.
Yeah.
And how light is moving through different things beyond words, right? Things that there's not even a way to conceptualize them really, but moving through different spaces that have different qualities or characteristics, and then arriving in human form and the interrelatedness and connectedness of it all. And of course, all other form. I think it's not like we arrive at human form, which is some sort of pinnacle. It's the lens that we're looking through. So that's the interaction that we have. Yeah. And as you were talking, this is just an aside, but I had one of those nights last night when there was no dreams and no waking, and it was just black, like anesthesia. I went to sleep and I woke up and there was nothing, which is rare. It's unusual for me to have that experience. And I was kind of reflecting on it this morning and doing my practices, and I just had a memory of talking to someone about non-duality, and about non-duality being the sort of the essence of everything. And I remembered that moment of conversation very clearly. And so I'd forgotten that completely until I'm talking to you now, and we're talking about this non-dual space. So I love that. I think that when you described this experience before, you also were talking about the different geometries that exist under the worldviews, including social structures, including definitely ideas of right or wrong, this and that. This idea that there's a left and a right and a good and a bad, and that there are geometries that have been holding up those structures, and now they are changing or falling and new things are coming in. Am I getting that right from what your experience was?
Like another experience I had with the surgeons before this, it was a really hard one for me because there was a physical component to it. Usually these are not physical. They really just feel like dreams. but they open like a portal. And again, it's hard for me to even talk about because it crosses a line where it even starts to feel too weird for me, but it's what happened. And I was suddenly in a lot of pain, and they sort of noticed I was in a lot of pain. So they sort of pulled me in, and then I was like experiencing it as I normally do. And they showed me this like path to the left that I would describe as like the karmic circle. She's like, this is the path we've been describing to you, in all the visits I had after Mark died, which is just like learning lessons on Earth. And then she showed me this path to the right, which at the time just like blew my head apart. Like, it's like I couldn't really process it at all, but it just had to do with working with different dimensions and different entities. And it's like funny, like sometimes the details in these experiences are like, it just like there was like a card table. Like I'd been taking my daughter to like some like college fairs, it felt like almost like a college fair, where there's like card table and all these like entities standing around. But it was definitely just like this other way of like working, and again, I feel like even the way they presented it like that, like you can go to college or not, you don't have to, but this is like an option for you. So yeah, I feel like as they were showing me like all these geometries and all these different ways of learning, and it was like there's these structures sort of like on this planet, like there's so much horror inside all these structures. One of the things I like after the experience, I just sort of kept collapsing and like so much grief and so much like heartbreak. And it was just like, I don't know how to move into this space where we can just like work, because these structures that are all on this planet are so horrible. And again, I'm not Christian at all. It's another part of some of these. I'm a little even uncomfortable with it. But what they showed me was that this is like what Christ did, that Christ laid the potential for another kind of grid. And it was sort of given to me as the metaphor of like between the path to the left and the path to the right, there's an ocean of horror and heartbreak, and there's just no way you can swim the ocean, so Christ laid this like grid down where we can walk it. We still have to walk it, we still have to process what humans have done on this planet, but it's possible. Swimming the ocean isn't possible, right? Walking that distance is still hard, but possible. So yeah, I feel like there is really something about forgiveness, that is essential to just allowing all of those old geometries, all those old structures to just sort of dissolve. Because I know for myself, I feel like the more we focus on them, and even if you're grieving them, it's like you're keeping them alive, and there's something about like really shifting the focus. Forgiveness allows you to really move on. And I feel like that's really going to be essential to allow a lot of those old structures that I think are real. These geometries are real. I mean, and I've heard people talk about geometries. That was like really the first time I'd ever experienced them. And they always sounded so kind of like odd to me. Like I didn't get it. And what I feel like they are is like, they're almost like libraries. And you can like sort of almost like walk into them. It's just like this, almost like this energetic library. But I think if we're going to start really laying down new grids, creating new structures, new ways to be in this world, I do think forgiving and letting go, like there's just, I don't know. And I can get very caught up in my anger and my grief of all the terrible things, and just swirl and swirl in my mind. But I think a lot about like your experience with the honeycomb matrix, and they talked about like the quality of focus. I feel like this really ties together for me. Even if you're focused on what in my mind is a good thing, of like, let's focus on people suffering in wars and, terrible things. You're just feeding the anger again and again. And it's hard. It still can be a hard one for me to, really not feel like I'm being irresponsible by
Right.
not like focusing on those things.
It's coming up so much lately, and it's so tricky for exactly the reason that you're saying. For me, and this is the way that I've made sense of it, it's not about looking away from the reality of suffering and putting blinders on and pretending that it's not happening. A lot of the things that have been kind of coming up in my mind as you've been talking are that there's a structure that's been on this planet for a very long time about evolution through suffering. And we do evolve through suffering. We do. It works. Things get hard enough, we change, and it's through enormous pain that happens. And it's this sort of karmic cycle that I think that you're talking about that takes thousands and thousands of lifetimes. And it is the suffering that teaches us. And I still have my own ontological shock and awe, which I love, by the way, around this, which is that what they told me is that we're moving from evolution through suffering to evolution through joy and creativity. And that's sort of the moment that we're approaching on the planet. We're not there as a collective. We're still as a collective going through evolution through suffering. And also there are glimmers of what evolution through joy and creativity look like, which I think is what you're speaking about and what I've been feeling. And the honeycomb matrix sort of shows us how to do that by where we place our attention and the quality of our attention. And then we wrestle with this idea of, is it okay to quote unquote look away? Are we being irresponsible? Are we putting on blinders, which can happen? It's my life is much better without intaking media right now, to be honest. And I'm doing that intentionally because I am working on the mirror of my mind and working on the honeycomb matrix. And my life is better. It's easier. And I could kind of float, if I didn't have the desire to, and just this deeply ingrained part of myself that wants to be of service, that went so far down into the grief and into the reality of suffering. I stayed with like the first noble truth for a really long time. Suffering exists. I was like, amazing. Let's talk about let's really accept that one and get it, because to me, it's through the portal of that we can enter into this other geometry as you describe it, and create it as we go by choosing to use the other thing that you talked about, this creative tension of the triangle, and that this planet is for creativity, and we can create on this planet. And so we can create a heaven on earth. And I am getting more comfortable saying that. And heaven on earth does not preclude suffering, ironic, paradoxically, like there's a lot of paradox here. There still will be death. There still will be loss. There still will be grief. It's just that these things won't be a problem. And it's almost as if our denial of them is what creates the geometry and suffering, or our insistence that there is something wrong with it, and the kind of fear and separation that comes when we are not okay with the reality of what this planet is, which is this tension. It feels like that for me first, the deep acceptance of the reality of that, and now is moving towards something where very clear-eyed, not from a place of naivety or rose-colored glasses in any way, shape, or form, but from a very deep place of truth and of being with the reality of suffering. Something else is emerging that says there's an alchemy that can happen to create a new geometry. And I mean, it's seen, there's lots of different levels and ways. The Buckminster Fuller talking about, if you want to create something new, focus on creating the new thing rather than, the sort of the old systems kind of crumble while we turn our focus away from that and create something new. And it's very edgy. It feels kind of Like there's some dangerous edges to slip off of. And also, I think that that's what this time is about. For me, it is,
Yeah.
that's what we're doing.
Yeah, no, I totally think so. And I feel like what's so like beautiful for me in this moment is like, I have no idea where it's going, and, with all these experiences, often comes a lot of intuition, so it's like that sense of knowing where the future's going has been very strong for me. And it's like, I have no idea. And my mind is going into places like I never even imagined, like the sort of hybrid diamond jellies foundation. It's like a sci-fi classic book, but they have a character in there they call the spacers. And the spacers they're like genetically modified humans, and they can withstand the folding of time. So they run the ships, because humans have to be put to sleep when they fold time. So after I had this experience, all I could think about were the spacers. And it just feels like, literally, I sort of feel like we're just folded into this time, like these things that have felt so fictional are real. What does it mean when we really start to really get we don't die? Like really get that, really get our bodies go away. But so much human suffering, I feel like, just comes from this like madness around fearing death. And it's like, if we can really start to understand, and in a way where it's like, I want science, I want psychology, I want these really modern institutions to come along with us, on this. It's like I'm very anxious around what religions can do, because, there is an element where when that meaning making, when that art form becomes like accessed as like truth, it's really dangerous. But like for myself, I'm just sort of giving myself more freedom in that, like the art form of it, of that meaning making, because I've been really resistant to that for a really long time. But it's like fun for me, right? It's fun for me to suddenly be like, yeah, these like diamond jelly hybrids are like, they're like the spacers. And I do sort of think maybe these things are about space and time. And this is a particular space and time we're just getting folded into, to just have that art conversation. But if we could start to have like science and psychology ground certain pieces of it at the same time, that's just how I can see these new grids really taking hold in terms of culture on some sort of massive scale. Because if it's not, it's going to continue just to be, people having these experiences and, adjusting. I mean, I feel like it's always benefited my life. Like, this is good for me, but it's going to take a lot, I think, for this to really shift culture, really out of religion. And I really am looking at scientific materialism effectively as a form of religion. I think it's a belief system that they know absolute truth. I think they have their saviors, in technology or in academia. It's like we're in a moment of religious war, is like really how I view culture wars at this point. And to really reground ourselves back into real art and real science that really allows for openness and creativity and exploration is when I think some of these new grids are gonna really start to be built.
One thing that's been coming up for me a lot is this idea that it's very intrinsic in me, and I think in the culture, that is being deconstructed for me, which is that there's a real thing happening out there, and it's like the weight of the machine of the overculture is the quote unquote real thing. Like, it's so heavy and it's so slow and it's so big and it has so much gravity that these leading edges, or I'm not sure exactly, again, the language sort of fails, but these edges of exploration of story and art and creativity and the new grid, which is just lights me up every time that you say it, that those things don't feel like they exist yet. And in many ways they don't. But I feel that literally conversations, like literally this conversation is creating the grid.
100%. Yeah. No, I always think about like there's these moments that ever since I was a kid, like I just loved, like early 20th century Paris, with Picasso and, or 1970s New York with CBGB or, Seattle in the 90s. There's these like moments where something is happening and it'll eventually really have like a strong impact on the world. But it's almost that moment before that hits, that's really the magic moment. And I sort of feel like we're in one of these moments right now where something really magical's happening. And I think this is huge, way bigger than any of those, like I just said. Yeah, I just feel like I'm just enjoying it, right? Like how to just like relax and enjoy just the quality of conversations, the quality of creativity. And I feel like in all those moments, right, it's not that they didn't know that the world, I mean, a lot of the fuel of a lot of it is that the world was like a mess, but they allowed it to feed something in their soul for just even a few years, and it had a huge impact. And I do really feel like this is it. This is the moment where something's really, really changing. And you know it when you really know where you can't know where it's going. Right? Like that's how you really know you're in the eye of the creative hurricane, right? Because it just feels good and calm, while at the same time you have no idea where it's going, what's happening. It's absolutely just destroying everything in its path, because it's just what nature does, right? Nature just has to destroy everything now and then.
It's part of the turning of the wheel. And that's, for me personally, I've been sort of, even just in the last day or two, feel like I'm sort of perched on the leading edge of this turning wheel. And it's just about to turn as nature turns, as the seasons turn, as the cycle turns, as it's like movement and life. And the other thing is, I love that you brought this up, because it's been something that in the back of my mind, I keep meaning to say on the podcast and in my writing and things like that, which is we're going to miss this. As crazy as that sounds, as crazy as it sounds, that we're going to miss this ridiculous time with everything happening on the world stage and the real suffering and everything that's going on. It is also this bleeding edge of creative reality. And I could feel it as you were talking. I was having flushes of heat through my body. There was just these flushes of heat coming up, and feeling the truth. And I'm covered in chills right now of not knowing where it's going, and being present for an emerging culture is too small of a word, but that's the word that we have. There's an emerging culture that we're witnessing and that we're a part of that is going to change things. And maybe not for, I'm a big believer in the 8.5 billion realities on this planet. So it will change, I don't know how it will change every single reality on the planet. I don't think there's one reality, but in this collective, in my experience of reality, in the West, in this geometry, like this big geometry, the weight of the overculture, the gravity that is so heavy, there is something new emerging. And it is like, for me, once the nervous system is okay, once we can help our bodies feel safe and well and taken care of, and we can't leave them behind, because otherwise we're just in a triggered trauma response all the time. It's not fun. But once the bodies are okay, it's really fun. And I say that again, like, people who have been with me on this podcast for a while know that I never skip around suffering. So I'm not skipping around the suffering, and I'm acknowledging that there is something so alive happening right now, and that it's going to take us into a new way of being on the planet with each other, with the planet. And we're in the kind of destructive and creative process. A death and a birth are always woven directly together. So we're in a death and a birth, and it feels like life, and it will stabilize at some point. And it will not be this. It will not be this raw creative energy. I don't think, I think that it'll probably cycle and steady at some point, and that we get to do this right now is extraordinary.
Yeah, no, I've been thinking about all of that. Those moments are so special. Those just like moments when culture feels like it's, at its worst, and there's something that emerges, and we've become so self-aware that those sort of like cultural points that I, mentioned, it's like our overculture is looking for those points, right? It's like it's so self-aware, and it's so aware of what's cool, and you can just feel like this is the thing nobody's looking at.
Mm-hmm.
Overculture is not really looking here. And it's not that they're not looking at like spirituality or, it's like they're looking at all of it, but they're not really looking at like what I feel going on. Like I can just feel it. I can feel it in my bones that there's something really, and I don't even know, like in terms of like, what does it produce? Like, is it going to produce books and movies and music like it did in the past? Maybe not. I have no idea like what comes out of this, but I know this is the moment where something really new, so new that we can't even imagine it. And it's the difference between creativity and just repeating the same stuff, just being derivative. It's like
right.
derivative is never really creativity. And I feel like we're in a moment in our overculture where we're producing something that's like a very high quality derivative over and over again. So people I have a hard time. Like I love pop culture, and I'm like having such a hard time finding things to tap into, because I'm like, oh, it's just the same thing over and over again. Even though the quality of like writing or production or, visually, like things can be amazing, but it's so boring, where this is never boring. Something really interesting. It feels very punk rock to me, where it's like, even if the aesthetic quality isn't quite there in some of it, it's just like, it doesn't matter, because like the ideas are so interesting. And you can feel people like alive, motivated, uninspired. Like I feel nothing inspiring. I don't feel people. I don't even feel like art, like great artists inspired in the overculture right now. Right? Yeah, I can listen to some random YouTube channel, and find people more inspired if they're having this conversation.
Yeah, I really hear that. Yeah. You're helping me get close and stay close to what I feel is the real truth of this moment, which is the novelty, which is the real novelty that we can't understand. We can't predict. We don't know where it's going. And there's a sort of slipstream in that just takes us on a ride, and remaining open to the mystery and having, and then watching my mind, and I know yours too, because we've talked about this, watching how quickly it gets translated and like categorized. Like that's what we're always trying to do, is like an experience happens and then put it into a box or into a space. And then an experience happens, put it into a box or space. And this really defies that. And that's exciting. And so we have to just exist in this, one of like where I landed with this stuff several years ago through the help of really good teachers was like, get comfortable in the liminal, because that's the most true, quote unquote, true place to be, and also the most alive, and also the most fun. And it is ontological shock and awe. And it's possible to let that liminal foundation be the ground. So it's a place of paradox. It's a definite place of, it's like existing in the paradox. It's holding the tension of, what Marion Woodman called holding the tension of the opposites. What you're calling is like holding this
Yeah.
tension of the three of the triangle. And there's a real vital magic there.
There
Exciting.
is. And I feel like one of the things that you hear, I mean, it was my experience and you hear a lot, is where experiences feel realer than real. And lately I'm like, that's horrible.
Mm.
I reject that. I want my life to feel as real as the experiences.
Yes.
Like, that's so crazy. And I'm just like, I've gotten like really in tune to like that happens because I feel like when we're here, and it's maybe just more of a modern Western thing. I don't know if humans have always done this, but it's like, we conceptualize and then categorize and organize so much that what we're really doing is we're separating the experience of life from our function all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of like what you're saying and what I'm feeling in all of this is like, it's allowing the immediacy of life to like enter in to everything more.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that will mean accepting the weird, accepting what we don't understand, because that will happen within that immediacy, and just go with it a little more.
It makes me think of the experience with the purple orb and this teacher with this wild gray hair, and we were walking through it, and she was telling me that all of the bodies have to be relatively close in resonance in order to cross a threshold. And as you're talking about that, what it felt like was that the physical body, the densest, the slowest, it has, for much of my life, the distance between the physical body, emotional body, and these like otherworldly, etheric, multidimensional, causal, astral bodies has felt very far apart from each other. And it feels to me like they're getting closer. And as you were describing that, which is that the experience of being alive, which again, for me, is like life herself moving through us, when the mind tries to stop it, categorize it, make sense of it, which, thank you, mind. Like, I don't want to leave behind the rational self. Very necessary to have. But the slowing down of that maybe is what creates that distance, and that being in the experience, like letting the experience move and flow, letting the mind catch up as it does later, but not having to try to, being with the mystery again, feels like it's bringing all of those bodies closer together in some way. Which is a new thought that I haven't had before. So thanks for bringing it.
Yeah. Well, and I do. And I think, because another challenge that I've talked with you a lot about is like, I have a neurodivergent child, and just the battles with the schools and all of that. But it's like one of the things that's for her, where her ability to perform those modern tasks is limited, in part because she absolutely rejects to slow down.
Mm.
I mean, it's just incomprehensible to her. I mean, she just lives in that immediacy all the time. And it's fascinating, right? Because it is like, it's beautiful. She's just joy most all the time. But it is then like, I don't know that she's ever going to be able to learn to drive. I don't know, there's things that you have to do. I think this is a part of that whole, I think it's even why the whole neurodivergent conversation inside this little world is exploding so much, because I think there is those who really see something's happening in people who process information differently, process the world and energy differently. But it's like, I really have no idea where it's going, right? It's not like I'm sitting here and being like, I see these gifts and the whole world needs to change to be like that, because it's more complicated than that. But inside that complexity is that tension, right? It's like the tension doesn't always have to be, somebody doing something horrible to a human being and somebody doing something kind. We can have a creative tension of like, what does that mean to be someone who's just in that constant state of flow and connected, versus how do you slow down? And can you slow down for part of the time and then speed up? And what does that mean? Like, those are the kind of creative tension points like I'm far more interested in exploring. Like I am just exhausted with violence and hatred, and there's going to be people in the world who need to explore those tensions. I can't be there anymore, but that tension, this is almost like the essence of the tension I'm really interested in exploring, is the speed of life through slowing down for cognitive processing. And how do you balance that? And what does that mean? Yeah, I think it'll be so fun as we start to do that, because it's like, I don't know. I just don't know. But I know it's 100% where I want to start exploring.
Oh gosh, I love this so much. I always have a wonderful experience sitting with you and talking with you and exploring ideas with you. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we come to a close?
Just I appreciate you so much. I really do. And I was thinking about it this morning of just like, I feel like your book for me, like the thing that it really, like that was so different and it really opened up for me was like, I feel like so many people who have experiences always tried to turn it into some like high wisdom, as opposed to just like being with just the hard, strange realities of it. So I really appreciate it, because I feel like you're really the first person I really saw like publicly just go down that path. And I think it's really, I know it's changed my comfort level with it, because I was just always like, I am definitely not wise. Like I don't know how other people seem to like have instant enlightenment. That is not what happened to me. But I love it, because I feel like in that really opens up this conversation for a little more like, wild creativity.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And you remind me to continue to occupy that space. And also I would say it would be very hard for me to not describe you as wise. And I understand what you're talking about. I understand that that it's a process, it's a becoming, and it's an unfolding. It's what I want to be here for. I have an idea that, if near-death experiences and if all these things that point us to these kind of other worlds and what happens after death, I'm sure it's fascinating. I'm sure it's beyond what we can imagine. I'm sure incredible things happen. And also, I'm sure it's not like this. I'm sure that it's not the experience of being a human with amnesia and either remembering or discovering or creating the story of our human life. And there seems to be something really profoundly special about that. The fact that we can do that in all of our multidimensionality, and that we really are creators, that there's not a blueprint to follow other than something that may emerge within ourselves. And so you always remind me to keep occupying that big, open, creative space that feels really alive. So thank you so much. Thank you so much again to Michelle for sharing so courageously and for bringing her brilliant mind to this space. Thank you to all of you, and to Morgan Jenks for our beautiful soundscapes. If you would like to get more information about Becoming Apocalyptic Mother or any of the other cohorts, groups, services that I offer, please visit robinlassiter.com.